unit ng pamahalaan lokal kung saan dito pinag-uusapan ang bawat sigalot ng mga residente ng bawat barangay. Dito rin pinag-uusapan ng mga piling hanggang na opisyal na barangay ang mga proyekto para sa kanilang barangay. Kumustahin natin ang panunungkulan ni Kapitan dito sa Dalo Barangay sa Millennial Online TV Worldwide, ang katropa ng bawat barangay.
Tinatapos ang ating pagpupulong. Maraming salamat po sa inyong pagdalo at tapos na po ang ating session. Enjoy na po tayo.
Ikaw ba'y stress? O may dinaramdam? O gulong-gulo na talaga isip mo? Tumutok lamang at panoorin dito sa Millennial Online TV. May tuturo po ko sa inyong isang paraan upang maibsan at mabawasan niyang problemado ninyong pag-iisip. Ito ay ang Tai Chi Learning Series. Sana po tumutok po kayo at abangan niyo po kung Sabado po ng umaga yan. Dito lamang po sa Millennial Online TV. Salamat po!
Mga milenyo, pagod ka na ba galing sa trabaho? At gutom na sa maghapong pagtatrabaho? Pero wala kang pagkain sa bahay. Narito na ang sagot, mga katropa. Ang super manok lechon. Napapawi sa inyong gutom at siguradong mapapa-anirize ka dahil sa tender juicy na jam mo pa. At siguradong malinis at bagong katay buhat sa farm. Kaya super masalasa at pangmasa pa. Ano pa hinihintay niyo, mga katropa? Takbo na sa Super Manok Panteño Siniluan at bumili na, baka maabusan ka, katropa.
Mga millennials, marunong na ba kayong magluto ng mga masasarap at swak sa budget na mga pagkain? Abay, huwag puro lang kayo aksi at ML at puro pagkakalikot lang ng cellphone. Dapat marunong ka rin sa gawaing bahay at tulungan ang inyong mga mamsi. Kaya tara na, samahan natin ang kusinera ng bagong milenyo, si Ate J. At tuturuan tayong magluto ng mga masasarap na ulam para sa ating mga hapagkainan at swak pa sa budget. Ika nga, a delicious food on a proper price. Tara na, mga katropa! I-type lang sa inyong mga cellphone, sa inyong mga Facebook at YouTube, ang Millennial Online TV.
Ikaw ba'y nag-iisa? Nalulungkot? Dahil iniwan at ipinagpalit? Niloko ng iyong minamahal? Kung ngayon, i-type sa inyong mga cellphone, Facebook o YouTube man ang Millennial Online TV. Dahil nasa Millennial Online TV na ang online haralista ng bagong milenyo, si Randel Villados.
Naninigas ang aking katawan kapag umikot ng plaka.
At haharanahin kayo ni Randel ng iba't ibang awitin para maibsan ang inyong inip at kalungkutan kahit nasaan man kayo.
Hanggang sa tumanda. Come on! Kung tayo'y matanda na, sana'y di tayo magbago.
At pwede rin kayong makiduet kay Randel tuwing Sabado ng hapon. Tutok na Tawag na mga milenyo.
Araw-araw ikaw ang gusto kong kasama. Buhay ko'y kumpleto na tuwing nandito ka sa tabi ko o aking giliw.
Mga katropa, ako po si Randel Villados, ang online naranista ng bagong milenyo ng Millennial Online TV na nag-aanyaya sa inyo na makikanta, makisaya at tumutok sa lahat ng programa ng Millennial Online TV. I-type lamang sa inyong Facebook at YouTube ang Millennial Online TV. Nood na mga katropa!
Ako inyong lingkod, Rosel Lopez, ang inyong katropa, ang inyong kabarangay dito sa Millennial Online TV. Abangan ang ating mga kaganapan dito sa ating bansa at abangan din ang panunungkol ni Kapitan sa ating Dalaw Barangay. Paano nyo kami mapapanood? I-type lamang sa inyong mga cellphone, sa inyong Facebook at YouTube ang Millennial Online TV. Ano pa hinihintay nyo mga katropa? Like, subscribe, at share na. Okay mga katropa?
Mga katropa, ako po si Gazi Sarip, ang inyong tagapaghatid ng balita sa bagong milenyo na nag-aanyaya sa inyo na tunghayan ang aking mga pag-uulat at tumutok sa lahat ng programa dito sa Millennial Online TV. I-type lamang sa inyong Facebook at YouTube ang Millennial Online TV. Nood na mga katropa! Mga katropa, ako po si Jim Pahayag, ang inyong tagapaghatid ng mga balita sa bagong milenyo na nag-aanyaya sa inyong matunghayan ng aking mga pag-uulat at tumutok sa lahat ng programa ng Millennial Online TV. I-type lang sa inyong mga Facebook at YouTube ang Millennial Online TV. Nood na mga katropa!
Hanap mo ba ay Unwind Ventures? Tara nang mamangha sa mga tanawin. Ano man ang iyong travel goals? Dadalhin namin kayo sa Unwind Ventures at Saya. Dito lang sa Wow Biyahe. Kaya wow, di ba?
Abangan dito lang sa Millennial Online TV. Mga balita at pangyayaring naganap sa buong magdamag. Ihimayin, tatalakayin, ibabalita, ngayon na, dito lang sa Millennial Online TV News Recap.
Kasi hindi naman halos lahat or the CIDG. Ito yan sila. So ito yung dalawang CIDG
Nagbabasa ka pa ba ng dyaryo? O nakikinig ka pa ba ng radyo? Kung ngayon, lahat yan ay mapapakinggan nyo na sa inyong mga cellphone. Dahil online na tayo, mga kamilenyo. Kaya manood, makinig dito sa Millennial Online TV.
Rider, sumalpok sa
Kaya
poste ng
i-follow, like, subscribe, at i-share na mga katropa.
Now, we are
Talakayin,
biggest destruction of dangerous drugs worth 1
rebisahin, opinyon, malawakin, aksyonan. Kasama si Rosel Lopez, ang inyong katropa sa pagbabalita. Dito lang sa Millennial Online TV. Tutok na mga katropa!
Ayun maganda hapon. Ngayon po ay Marso Agis na, taong 2022. Araw po ng Huwebes, abay ngayon po'y samba po ng relihiyong Iglesia ni Cristo. At ngayon siyempre sa inyo ng programang talakayin, rebisahin, opinyon palawakin, aksyonan, tropa. At siyempre po ako pa rin ang inyong magiging kasama, kakwentuhan, ka-jamming, ka-TFC, ka-barangay, ka-kosa. Dito po sa programang Tropa, Rosel Lopez. At kasama po natin sa technical side ang ating katropa, ang ating sidekick na si Joshua Baltao. Ang oras po naman natin sa buong kapuluan mga kaibigan, alas 4:11 po ng hapon, Philippine Standard Time. At nako, napakainit talaga ng panahon, Ika nga, it's summertime. Talaga namang mapipil mo na summer kasi yung pong init ng panahon, damang-dama mo, talaga namang konting kibot, gusto mong uminom ng tubig na malamig. O kaya naman soft drinks na maraming yelo. Joshua, At bukod dyan, siyempre gusto mong magtampisaw, sa tubig, sa dalampasigan. At siyempre, gusto mo siyempre lagi ka nasa malamig, di ba? Kasi nga mainit. Kaya nga uso ngayon ang swimming, outing, etc. Kahit na hindi man siya kagandahan, basta't makakapagtampisaw sa tubig, abay gora na. Siyempre, ganyan naman talaga pag summertime, di ba? Yun nga lang, siyempre sa ngayon, medyo hirap ang kabuhayan ng ating mga tropa pips, ng ating mga dabber cats, ng ating mga kababayan, kaya medyo higpit sinturon muna. Kaya ngayon, doon muna tayo magtiis sa mga tabo-tabo lang na ibubuhos. Magbabad ka, magtampiso ka sa pagbubuhos ng tubig sa pamamagitan ng tabo. Yun. Anyway, yung iba naman ay siyempre kahit na ganun pa man, ginagawa, nagpupunta po sa mga tabing dagat na malapit sa kanila or ilog, saka sila nagliligo. Para sabihin lang na nakiisa at naidaos nila ang summertime. Meron pa namang mga ilog dyan malilinis, mga ilog, mga sapa, kaya pwede pa. Ikaw ay taga-probinsya, marami diyang mga ilog na pwede kang maligo ng libre. Wala nang bayad. Di ba, Joshua? Pero kung dito sa Metro Manila, sa National Capital Region, magbabayad ka ng mga entrance sa mga pool. Hindi po pwedeng basta ka papasok ng libre. Siyempre, may maintenance siya swimming pool, di ba? Kumukuha ng lifesaver. Meron sila dong, etc. May mga cottages. So, kailangan magbabayad ka. Pero siguro, hindi naman ganun kamahal. Siguro, mga pagka-adult is 150. Kapag batang 5 years old and above is baka 100 or 80 pesos. Yun naman maghapon na. Hanggang ano oras mo gusto magbabad, sige lang. Anyway, mga kaibigan, mamaya alamin natin sa DOST Pag-asa ang ulat ng lagay ng ating panahon sa pamamagitan ng ating katropang weather specialist ng DOST Pag-asa, si Ginoong Alzar Aurelio. Mamaya po yan po yung bulletin mula kaninang madaling araw hanggang ngayong hapon, hanggang sa takip silim, hanggang sa pagsapit ng sunset. Mamaya po alamin natin yan kay Ginoong Alzar Aurelio. At siyempre, Ben, mamaya itutunghay din natin sa inyo yung ginawa pong forum, isang pulong balitaan na ginawa po dyan sa may Kamuning, sa Quezon City. Ito po tungkol sa kalagayan ng Ukraine. Ng bansang Ukraine, ano ba ang lagay na ng bansang Ukraine? Alam naman natin kung ano ngayon ang nangyayari sa lugar na yun, yung Ukraine crisis at yung NATO, at ang naging aral, ang iniwang aral dito sa Asia o sa Asia. At mga naging panelist po sa nasabing forum ay sina Dr. Joseph Gagerson, siya pong presidente ng Campaign for Peace, Disarmament, tama ba? Disarmament and Common Security USA. At nandun din ang reactor naman na si Dr. Walden Bello, chairperson and vice presidential candidate laban ng MASA, renowned international academic, human rights and peace campaigner. Mamaya po yan, alamin natin sa ginawang forum. Kaya katulad kahapon,
Yung ginawa nating forum tungkol po dun sa ano yung tinapik natin kahapon. Nakalimutan ko na, Joshua. Na kung saan naman po ay si Congressman Rodante Marcoleta ang naging isa sa panelist. Marami po tayong matututunan at malalaman, no? Diyan po sa ginagawang forum na yan. Kaya naman po tayo ay kahit paano ay medyo inaalam natin kung ano po ang mga updates dyan. Siyempre po ang naging moderator dyan ay si Wilson Flores, na isa rin pong kolumnista ng Philippine Star. Okay po na mga kaibigan, at mamaya meron din tayong babatiin na nagdaos ng kaarawan ngayong araw na ito, araw ng Huwebes, Marso 10. Mamaya po yung babatiin natin, si Min Bulaong. Sabay, ano na siya, na life begins at bali ilang taon na siya, 14 years old. 14 anyos, batang-bata. Mamaya po yan, makikita nyo sa inyo mga screen. At siyempre po yung ating mga Dabber Cats, yung ating mga LMT, no? Sina Ma'am Linda Villagonza, Miss Jackie Adahar, Sir Jojo Revilla, Sir Haji Crespo, Sir Romel Martinez, si Sir Joey Reyes, yan. Yan, tsaka si Ma'am Linda Villagonza, mga licensed massage therapist. At siyempre yung buong tropa ng Barangay Bayan-Bayanan dyan sa Malabon, abay siyempre sa pangunguna po ng kanilang barangay captain na tinagurihan si Cardo Dalisay ng Bayan-Bayanan dyan sa Malabon. Parang hindi ba ako madilim, Joshua, sa screen? Tingin mo, okay lang. Buksan mo pa kaya yung isang ilaw natin, oo. Yeah. Para naman medyo pumusyaw ng konti. Okay, at bukod dyan, bago natin simulan itong ating mga kwan, abay batiin muna natin yung ating mga Dabber Cats, yung ating mga tropa peeps, no, na lagi nakatutok sa Millennial Online TV. Sila Kuya Eagle Michael Dautil, buhat pa ho sa Agusan del Sur. Yung pong may plantasyon ng banana, ng saging dyan sa Agusan del Sur. At ganyan din si Ma'am Evelyn Lee Matsuo na nasa bansang Japan po ngayon. At sigurado kong nanonood siya ngayon na nakataas ang paa sa upuan at nakatutok sa kanyang 75 inches na LED TV. Siguro habang nanonood na gano'n ay nagkukukot ng siguro pistachio o kaya yung mga pop beans, mga pulp beans. Tama ba ako, Ma'am Evelyn? At ganyan din si Ma'am Lorna Buhalog Ligon ng Barangay Bayan-Bayanan dyan sa Malabon. Ayan, magandang hapon daw, friend. Good evening sa iyo. Good afternoon pala, friend. So, yan at siyempre, yung iba pa natin mga katropa peeps, sina Ford Tom, si paring Anthony Bautista, no, na ngayon ay nandiyan naman nakalipat sa may Barangay Acacia naman o Tinejeros, Malabon. Abay, kung saan lumilipat tong pari kong gwapo na to. Lahat na yata ng na sa Malabon barangay nalipatan na. Tama ba yun? Parang nalipatan na. Siyempre, ganyan ang mga negosyante, ganyan ang mga yayamanin. Kung kailangan ika nga, kung ang yayamanin ni around the world, ito naman si paring Anthony Abay around Malabon. At siyempre, yung kanyang business na Japan surplus. Hindi lang ho damit, hindi lang ho sapatos, lahat ng accessories meron doon. Mapaging kitchenware, maging mga gamit sa cellphone, meron po dyan. Mga bags, mga belt bags, marami po kompleto. Ultimo mga blanket, kumot, plato, baso, etc. Meron po doon. At murang-mura lang. Ika nga kayang-kaya ng bulsa. At ang pinakamaganda ron ay mga original pa. Okay, at syempre yung ating mga kakiwanyans, yung ating mga kagrupo sa Kiwanis Club International o Kiwanis Club, Kiwanis Club, dyan po sa Tugatog, Malabon, at syempre sa buong Pilipinas. Magandang hapon po mga kakiwanyans. At syempre yung ating katropa, yung simpatikong katropa natin ng Barangay Tugatog, Malabon, na si Kagawad Sani Dadad Pineda. Ayan, magandang hapon. Ayan. Okay, sa mga kaibigan, bago yan, abay, alamin muna natin sa DOST Pag-asa ang lagay ng ating panahon, kung may bagyo ba, El Nino na ba, para malaman natin. Okay, mga kaibigan, pakinggan natin si Ginoong Alzar Aurelio.
Magandang umaga, narito po ang ating weather update sa araw nito, March 10, 2022. Ang low pressure area ay nasa bandang Sulusi at malapit ito sa Palawan. Kasalukuyan, ang layo ng low pressure area ay nasa 255 kilometers south-southwest ng Puerto Princesa City. Ito ay nananatili pa rin mababa ang tsansa na maging bagyo. At sa araw nito, magbibigay pa rin ito ng mga maulap na kalangitan na may mga pag-ulan sa malaking bahagi ng ating bansa. Samantala, ang northeast monsoon o amihan ay nakakaapekto sa malaking bahagi ng Luzon. At shear line ay naapektuhan ang malaking bahagi ng Visayas. Sa araw nito, makakaranas ng maulap na kalangitan na may mga kalat-kalat na pag-ulan at thunderstorm. Sa Palawan, dulot po yan ng low pressure area. Paalala po sa ating mga kababayan sa Palawan, mag-ingat po tayo dahil sa itong mga pag-ulan ating maranasan na posibleng magdulot ng pagbaha o pagguho ng lupa. Sa lalabing bahagi ng Mimaropa, kasama na rin ang Bicol Region, Cagayan Valley, Cordillera, Aurora at Quezon. Dahil sa amihan, magiging maulap na kalangitan na may mga mahihinang pag-ulan. Samantala sa lalaming bahagi ng Luzon, kasama ang Metro Manila, ay magiging maganda at maliwala sa panahon maliban sa mga isolated na mahihinang pag-ulan. Ang agwat ng temperatura sa Metro Manila ay 24 to 31 degrees Celsius. Baguio, 14 to 25 degrees Celsius. Tuguegarao, 21 to 28 degrees Celsius. Sa Legazpi, 24 to 29 degrees Celsius. Puerto Princesa, 25 to 31 degrees Celsius. Calayan Islands, 26 to 31 degrees Celsius. Sa Visayas at Mindanao, dahil sa shear line at ang low pressure area, ang buong Visayas at buong Mindanao magiging maulap ang papawirin na may mga kalat-kalat na pag-ulan at thunderstorm. Mag-ingat po tayo para sa ating mga kababayan sa Visayas at Mindanao dahil may mga inaasahan pa rin tayo ng mga pag-ulan na kung saan nandiyan pa rin ang banta ng pagbaha o pagguho ng lupa. Ang agwat ng temperatura sa Iloilo ay 25 to 29 degrees Celsius. Cebu, 24 to 31 degrees Celsius. Tacloban, 25 to 28 degrees Celsius. Zamboanga, 25 to 31 degrees Celsius. Davao, 25 to 31 degrees Celsius. Cagayan de Oro, 24 to 29 degrees Celsius. Ngayong araw, meron pa rin tayong gale warning dahil malakas pa rin ang amihan. Kaya ang mga baybaying dagat na maapektuhan ay sa Batanes, Cagayan, kasama ang Babuyan Islands, Isabela, Ilocos Norte, Aurora, Northern at Eastern Coast ng Piliilo Island, Camarines Norte, Northern at Eastern Coast ng Camarines Sur, at Northern at Eastern Coast ng Catanduanes. Mag-ingat po tayo at huwag mo nang pumalaot sa mga lugar nito dahil sa matataas na alon, kung saan ang tasang alon po nito ay aabot hanggang 4.5 meters. At sa ating extended weather outlook mula March 11 hanggang March 13. Sa Metro Manila, Baguio City, sa susunod ng 3 araw, maganda at maliwasan pa ng ating inaasahan maliban sa mga isolated na may hinang pag-ulan bukas sa Metro Manila at sa Baguio. Pero sa weekend, asahan ang mga isolated na mga pag-ulan dahil sa localized thunderstorm. Sa Legazpi City, bukas at Sabado, patuloy na magiging maulan na panahon dahil pa rin sa epekto ng shear line. Pero pagdating ng Sunday ay magiging generally good weather maliban po sa mga isolated na pag-ulan dahil sa thunderstorm. Metro Cebu at Metro Davao. Susunod po 3 araw, fair weather po tayo. Maliban lang po sa mga isolated na mga pag-ulan o bigla ang buhos ng ulan dahil sa thunderstorm. Ang sunrise po natin mamaya pong 6:08 ng umaga. Sunset ay 6:06 ng hapon. Yan po ang ating weather update sa araw nito. Mula sa Pag-asa, ako po si Alzar D. Aurelio.
Ayun, maraming salamat po sa iyo, Ginoong Alzar Aurelio, ang ating pong katropang weather specialist ng DOST Pag-asa. Okay po, so yung mga kaibigan ng lagay ng ating panahon, ayan, nakita nyo naman, syempre meron pa rin mga isolated rains. Kaya nga pabugso-bugso lang. Hindi naman talaga siyang gano'n. Syempre dala po yan ng amihan pa rin. Kahit sabihin natin tag-init. Okay mga kaibigan, nagatid sa atin yan sa oras na alas 4:27 po ng hapon, Philippine Standard Time. Yan po ang oras natin sa buong kapuluan. At bago tayo magpatuloy, abay nanonood para sa atin si Brother Manny Perez ng lungsod ng Caloocan, dyan po sa Bagong Silang. Siya pong may-ari at general manager at sabihin na nating owner ng Painter's Choice dyan sa Bagong Silang, Caloocan. Yung mga gusto magpaganda ng bahay, magpaganda ng inyong mga sasakyan, at lalo taga dyan lang sa Caloocan na may puntahan nyo na yung Painter's Choice Paint Center na pag-aari po ni Ginoong Manny Perez. At kung kayo gusto nyo humingi ng tawad, abay hintayin nyo si Boss Manny. Siyempre hindi makakapag-decide yung kanya mga tao ron. Kung gusto nyo lang naman, kung kayo naman ay yayamanin, huwag nyo lang hintayin, bayaran nyo na. Tama ba yun, Boss Manny Perez? Yan ang sinasabi ko lang sa inyo. Kung gusto nyo maka-discount, hintayin nyo si Ginoong Manny Perez. Kung kayo naman ay yayamanin, bayaran nyo na. Huwag nyo na siyang hintayin. At yun naman gustong makakuha ng talagang malaking discount at maramihan ng kukunin, abay makipag-usap po kayo ng masinsinang kay Ginoong Manny Perez. At hindi ho kayo mapapahiya. Siguradong kahit paano ipagbibigyan kayo niya. Okay, nako mga kaibigan, alas 4:28, pero bago tayo magpatuloy, abay batiin muna natin, Nagdadaos po ngayon ng kanyang kaarawan, itong si Min Pili Delino Bulaong. Ayan, siya po ay nagdadaos ng kanyang kaarawan at siya po ay ilang taon na ba ito si Min? Alam ko bata pa ho ito no? Pero alam niyo po ito ay ano bang taon nyo? Matagal na. Pero anyway, batiin po natin ng happy birthday si Min Bulaong. Ayan po, ito, kantahan natin siya.
Infobells! Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday to dear one. Happy birthday to you.
Ayun, happy birthday sa iyo, Min Bulaong, ng lungsod ng Malabon. Ayan, siyempre ang pagbati rin po ay buhat sa kanyang mga Junakis, yung kanyang mga anak na sina Colleen Bulaong at si Andrew Bulaong. Ayan, yan po yung ating yung pong mga anak niya, yung mga Junakis niya. Yan, sila Andrew at si Colleen, yan po. Kita nyo naman, Okay. Okay, sa mga kaibigan, nagatid dyan sa atin sa oras na alas 4, eksakto imedya ng hapon, Philippine Standard Time. At magandang hapon din kay Maring Chris Torres ng Malolos, Bulacan. Magandang hapon daw, sabi niya, paring Rosel. Abay, God bless din sa iyo. Basta pag natuloy ka, Mars, ha, huwag mong kalilimutan yung billing ko. Yun naman kung okay lang sa'yo. Kung hindi naman, wala naman problema. Okay, so mga kaibigan, bago tayo magpatuloy, abay, magpapakilala lang po si Joshua Baltao para malaman niyo po kung saan kayo himpilang nanonood at nakikinig. Magbabalik po kami.
Pinaigting, pinalakas ang bagong news online TV ng bagong milenyo. Millennial Online TV, ang katropa mo sa pagbabalita. Nagbabasa ka pa ba ng dyaryo? O nakikinig ka pa ba ng radyo? Kung ngayon, lahat yan ay mapapakinggan nyo na sa inyong mga cellphone. Dahil online na tayo, mga kamilenyo, kaya manood, makinig, dito sa Millennial Online TV.
Rider, sumalpok sa
Kaya
poste ng
i-follow, like, subscribe, at i-share na, mga katropa. Mga balita at pangyayaring naganap sa buong magdamag. Ihimayin, tatalakayin, ibabalita, ngayon na, dito lang sa Millennial Online TV News Recap.
Kasi hindi naman lahat, halos lahat. Or the CIDG. Ito yan sila. So ito yung dalawang CIDG by Philippines.
Barangay, pangunahing unit ng pamahalaan lokal kung saan dito pinag-uusapan ang bawat sigalot ng mga residente ng bawat barangay. Dito rin pinag-uusapan ng mga piling halal na opisyal na barangay ang mga proyekto para sa kanilang barangay. Kumustahin natin ang panunungkulan ni Kapitan dito sa Dama Barangay sa Millennial Online TV Worldwide, ang katropa ng bawat barangay.
At tinatapos ang ating pagpupulong. Maraming salamat po sa inyong pagdalo at tapos na po ang ating session. Enjoy na po tayo.
Now, we are
Talakayin,
Biggest destruction of dangerous drugs worth 1.2
rebisahin,
billion.
opinyon, malawaking, aksyonan. Kasama si Rosel Lopez, ang inyong katropa sa pagbabalita. Dito lang sa Millennial Online TV. Tutok na, mga katropa!
Ayun, maraming salamat sa iyo, Joshua Baltao. At nagatid po yan sa atin sa oras alas 4:34 po ng hapon. At tuloy-tuloy naman tayo mga kaibigan sa ating tatalakayin, sa ating itutunghay ngayong araw, yung tungkol po sa Ukraine crisis. Nako, alam nyo, sa totoo lang ho, kahit sabihin natin Ukraine at Russia lang yan, abay, apektado ho tayo. Bakit? Siyempre po, apektado po ang mga pangunahing presyo ng produktong petrolyo. At gayon din siyempre yung iba nating mga pangkabuhayan na ine-export natin doon, etc. Apektado po yan. Kaya dapat sana ay magkasundo na. No? Alisin na yun, tapusin na yung nangyayari sigalot sa pagitan ng Russia at ng Ukraine. Kasi napakahirap po yan. Lalo pa yan, meron tayong mga kababayan na nandun po sa magkabilang bansa na yan. Sana huwag naman pong madamay. Okay, so mga kaibigan, huwag na natin patagalin, tunghayin natin at alamin natin ang ginawang forum, no? Isa pong pulong balitaan dyan po sa lungsod ng Quezon City, no? Para malaman natin kung ano nangyayaring talakayan at ano na ba, kumusta na yung Ukraine crisis. At syempre, ano ba ang aral nito, ang magiging impact, no? Dito sa Asia. So mga kaibigan, panoorin natin.
numerous talks and interviews. He was educated at Georgetown University's School of Foreign Service and received his PhD in Politics and International Security Studies from the Union Institute and College. His many books include Empire and the Bomb, How the U.S. Uses Nuclear Weapons to Dominate the World, The Sun Never Sets, Confronting the Network of U.S. Foreign Military Bases. This was also published in the Philippines. The Deadly Connection, Nuclear War and U.S. Foreign Military Intervention, also published in the Philippines. With Hiroshima Eyes, Atomic War, Nuclear Extortion, and Moral Imagination, and others. His articles have appeared in the Bulletin of the Atomic Scientists, the Boston Globe newspaper, Eurasia Review, Common Dreams, Truth Out, and other publications. Interestingly, when he was young, Dr. Gerson was a Vietnam-era draft resistor and anti-war organizer. He has been a peace advocate all his life. He has been involved in launching the nuclear weapons freeze movement in the 1980s and led the successful opposition to plans to transform Boston Harbor into a nuclear weapons base. He has since worked closely with peace and nuclear disarmament movements across Asia and Europe, including anti-bases movements. He led international civil society mobilizations for the 2010 and 2015 Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty Review conferences. He is also co-convener of the International Peace and Planet Network, and many others. Let us welcome Dr. Joseph Gerson for his opening statement. Then we will later on invite Dr. Walden Bello, one of the most distinguished intellectuals in the Philippines, to be the reactor. Then later on, we'll open the floor to the media to ask questions. Welcome, Dr. Joseph Gerson.
Thank you very much. I'm going to be working from a much too long outline, so we'll see what I can do with that. I think the first and most important thing for me to say is, as much as I appreciate the invitation, I think you got it wrong. Walden should be the lead speaker, and maybe I could say a few words. Yeah, I've known Walden for over 40 years since he came into exile after leading opposition to the Marcos dictatorship, and I have fond memories of being with him. In 1990, I guess it was, in the Crossroads conference and demonstrations, and I just had the greatest respect both for Walden's work in leading really to Philippine independence from the bases, and his enormous intellectual contributions. And I feel in many ways that I'm one of his students, and I'm in a sense performing for my teacher here. But we'll see what we get. So asked to speak about the impacts of the Ukraine war on Asia and the Pacific, and simply to say that it has shattered what passed for the post-Cold War disorder, and the not only in Europe but internationally, the situation is highly fluid and uncertain. The invasion is to be condemned. I'll say a little bit more about that. Our movements have been calling for an immediate ceasefire, for all foreign troops out, and for diplomacy. And yet at the same time, I've been struck by the ways in which it mirrors what the United States have done over many years, in which in the context of the current war fever here is totally apparently forgotten. In terms of the civilians being attacked and killed, I was shocked to see a half-page op-ed in the New York Times by Madeleine Albright. When she was Secretary of State, she was asked if the deaths of 500,000 Iraqi children from economic sanctions was worth the price, and she said yes. We have the invasion of another country, an effort to overthrow a government of another country, and the use of Putin's nuclear threats. The United States, during international crises and wars, on at least 30 occasions, has made those similar threats as basically a function of extortion. Trying to work my way through this outline here. We face at the moment continuing dangers of escalation. On the one hand, simply out of miscalculations, the possibility of, in time, Russia attacking a rear supply base in Poland. The devastation of Russia's economy through the really undifferentiated sanctions, especially with the SWIFT, canceling the SWIFT for them, has been described as basically a nuclear equivalent attack on their economy. And we do have to worry about what Putin might do if he is cornered. We also have the extraordinarily dangerous calls here in the United States and in other countries for the creation of a no-fly zone over Ukraine. And were that to happen, it would inevitably lead to World War III. We have the global economic ramifications around the cost of oil, gas, and wheat, which are driving inflation, weakening economies, and having real devastations of individual people's lives. We also have here in the United States, those I wouldn't want to say it's the dominant call. We have rhetoric here saying the United States is going to be threatened by a new axis of evil, Russia, China, North Korea, and Iran, democracy against authoritarianism, as if the United States and many of its allies were fully democracies. Kind of moving through here. So just to say a little bit about the origins, I don't want to spend too much time here, but just to say there's a lot of complexity here. Ukraine's history is very, very complex. As you likely know, Kievan Rus was the origin of the Russian nation. Crimea was conquered and became the foundation for the Black Sea Fleet as far back as 1783, which makes that only a little bit younger than the United States. And you've got profound differences, religious, language, and economic orientations. With Eastern Ukraine oriented toward Russia, and Western Ukraine having been parts of Poland and Lithuanian empires. So there's a lot that's there. I think the proximate cause of the invasion had to do with NATO's invasion, and to appreciate that, in the early 1990s, you had the Paris Charter, you had the NATO-Russian Founding Act, you had OSCE agreements in 1999, all of which were based on common security, commitments that no nation would move to secure its security at the expense of other nations. And the United States and NATO countries did just that by expanding NATO to Russia's borders. And to appreciate that in the Russian consciousness are the memories of Napoleon's, the Kaisers, and Hitler's invasions at a cost of tens of thousands of Russian lives. Nina Khrushcheva, who teaches here in the United States and is Nikita Khrushchev's great-granddaughter, said in a webinar that we organized that Putin and the elite around him were just sick and tired of being relegated to sitting next to the toilet, they've responded to oust that system, but in ways that I think are going to redound very badly on Russia as well. Much more to say in terms of turning to the implications for Asia Pacific region. To understand that we've been in a tense and very dynamic situation. Walton has spoken and written about this at considerable length. We're in the classical tensions of rising and declining powers, empires, actually. The United States and China. They're inevitable tensions, and we have a history now beginning with Obama's pivot, but even from before that, with the United States seeking to reinforce its hegemony in the Asia Pacific region and thus globally as China rises. What do I want to say here? In terms of the impacts of the war, I mean, well, just to say China and India have both been in difficult situations. And this helps to explain why each of them abstained in the General Assembly votes. If you look at India, before I get to China, we have a country that upholds the concept of sovereignty and territorial integrity of all countries. It's a member of the Quad Neo-Alliance and belongs to that to balance China. But it's also dependent on Russian military equipment. It has trade with Russia, but it also faces the challenges of U.S. sanctions. So the Indian leadership is in a hard place right now. And I think both the Chinese and the Indians will sort of wait to see how things move. Before I get to talking a bit more about China, just to say that I've been struck by the absolute mind-boggling arrogance of Biden and Blinken in this period. At the very same time that the National Security Advisor Sullivan was warning Americans to get out of Ukraine because an invasion was coming. Where did Blinken go? He went to Australia and to Fiji for a meeting of the Quad Alliance and to Fiji to reinforce U.S. Influence in the Pacific Island nations to prevent the Seventh Fleet from being outflanked. Interestingly, earlier today, there was a major program by the East-West Center basically engaging representatives from many of the Pacific Island nations and territories and dependencies, protectorates, but an effort to kind of reconsolidate U.S. influence in Pacific Island nations. But at the same time that Blinken was in Fiji, the White House issued its new Indo-Pacific policy. That policy begins with the statement, the United States is an Indo-Pacific power. Well, read a lot into that. It's designed to intimidate. Like Obama and Trump, the policy describes Asia as the epicenter of geopolitics for the 21st century, with 2/3 of the global economy, half the world's population, and 7 of the world's largest military. It kind of frames U.S. policy and goals seeking to challenge the threat of authoritarian states, and it expresses the fear of China's growing influence in the Indo-Pacific and fears that it wants to become the world's most influential power. And it commits to, as it says, creating a lattice work of strong and mutually reinforcing coalitions, which are basically the foundations for Indo-Pacific NATO. These include the Quad, the new AUKUS nuclear alliance, which is a violation of the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty, among other things, and then a number of bilateral relations and ties. What we're going to see in the United States, but also I think globally, it's going to be massively increased spending for advanced weapons, and we have here in the United States, unfortunately, greater militarization of U.S. culture, which does not bode well for Asia-Pacific countries. What do I want to say here? And one of the priorities in the U.S. policy in the Indo-Pacific strategy is kind of economic efforts, building for infrastructure, among other things, to challenge the Belt and Road Initiative. So as I was saying, China is walking quite a tightrope. We had the February joint communique with Putin, in which they talked about the absolute commitments to one another, even if it wasn't a formal alliance. China has this long-term commitment to sovereignty, and they've gone to a great lengths to try to distinguish the situation in Ukraine from that in Taiwan, saying that Taiwan is not an international sovereignty question because Taiwan, as they see it, is a domestic issue for them. At the same time, China has deep economic ties to Ukraine, and in the context of sanctions, it's not eager to be losing market access to Europe or the United States. I think we can say that China was caught off guard. There's a lot of debate about what Putin and Xi talked about at the beginning of the Olympics, but I think the fact that they made no efforts to evacuate their diplomats or their students in Ukraine reflected that they were really quite off guard. And their initial statements sort of indicated degrees of support for, or at least a deep understanding of Russia's security concerns with NATO on its doorstep in ways that parallels the hundreds of U.S. bases and Seventh Fleet and alliances that surround China. So we had initial statements, but interestingly, they've modified those statements. They abstained at the UN, and in the last day or so, they've been in diplomatic conversations with France and Germany to see what might happen. They've also offered to be a mediator in this. It's complicated. China, on the one hand, could end up being a bit of a loser in this. Certainly, we have reinforced U.S. militarism, the reinforcement of NATO, as Biden said, the U.S. is back. But on the other hand, China is in a role where it could play a mediating role. It clearly is not seen as an aggressive warrior state, while the United States and Russia are. I guess the only other piece here to say is the relations between a number of Asia Pacific states and Russia have certainly deteriorated, in part because of their support for the sanctions. So I believe it was earlier today, Russia published a list of unfriendly nations, and these included Australia, Britain, Micronesia, New Zealand, South Korea, Singapore, Taiwan, and Japan. I think just the last thing to say, maybe close to where I began, is that we're into a period where we have been approaching, if you will, the consolidation, the crystallization of a new Cold War, and now it's no longer a question of being crystallized. It's one of the Russian interlocutors that I've been speaking with said, we're in a new ice age, and alliances are going to be sharpened. It's going to be quite a while before, certainly in the European stage or area, we'll have the negotiations that we need. And simply to say, I think this really puts greater pressure on those of us who want to prevent war, want peace, want common security relations among our countries, want justice, to be pressing as hard as we can for demilitarization. And only to say the other piece, the other big casualty in all of this, I hate to say it, is humanity's future. Because with the sharpening of tensions, with the breaking of diplomatic relations, it makes it that much harder for us to address the climate emergency, as well as other issues of common need, but especially the climate, which is, as it grows worse, as it will have devastating effects on people across the planet, and it, along with nuclear weapons, is the greatest existential threat to humanity. So it's really important for us to be trying to focus people on what is most important in terms of building peace, finding diplomatic solutions to the tensions that exist, and working for human survival. So quick and dirty, I hope that was helpful, and I'm sure Walden will have much more to say.
Thank you very much, Dr. Joseph Gerson, for very comprehensive and thought-provoking analysis and overview of the Ukraine crisis and its impact across the world, especially to our Asia region. Next, we'd like to call on Dr. Walden F. Bello, Chairperson and Vice Presidential Candidate of Laban ng Masa, one of the top intellectuals in the Philippines, renowned international academic, human rights and peace campaigner, for his reaction. Dr. Walden Flores Bello, a very respected leader and activist in the Philippines.
Okay, thank you. Thank you very much, Wilson. And thank you very much, Joe, for the excellent overview of the implications of the crisis in the Ukraine. I think that Joe's, really comprehensive experience on war and peace issues is very, very important at this time, since he has a lot of insights into the dynamics of war and how, we can prevent future wars. What I'd like to start with is something very, very local in concern, but which I was really struck about, which is that of the, in the last few days, we've had a lot of interviews with Filipino OFWs in the Ukraine, and how their lives have been disrupted and endangered by the recent events, by the Russian invasion. And what is interesting and tragic at the same time is when many of the OFWs are told that the government of the Philippines is ready to bring them back home so that they will escape the crisis and possibly dangers to their lives. The answer of most of them is that at least those that I have seen on television, is that we can't afford to return to the Philippines because there are no jobs there waiting for us. And basically what they're saying is that they would much rather risk their lives in danger zones than return to the Philippines, or the alternative is to look for jobs in Poland, in Hungary, in Moldova, many of those countries that are now accepting refugees from the Ukraine. And I think that this speaks very much to the problems that have befallen the Philippines. When I was the chairperson of the Committee on Overseas Workers Affairs in the House of Representatives from 2010 to 2015, I participated in efforts to get Filipino OFWs out of danger zones, particularly in Syria. And on one of these trips where we went from Damascus to Homs, which was then embattled in the civil war, and we were looking for Filipino OFWs that had been, we were told, were there. We were quite unsuccessful despite the efforts of some of our diplomatic officers who were quite courageous. But what struck me, recalling the situation there, is very much the response of many of our OFWs in Damascus at that time. When I returned to the Philippines, I said I could bring many of you back with me. And what they said was that, well, we'd rather stay here and take our chances with the civil war because there are no jobs in the Philippines. So that's, sort of the tragedy of the country, that the economy has been ruined by neoliberal policies, which has destroyed agriculture and manufacturing, leaving our compatriots to have no choice but to leave the country because there are no decent jobs over here, jobs that will allow them to rise in life and to fulfill some of their basic human needs, including, work with dignity. And, when I see this happening in the Ukraine again, that they would much rather risk their lives staying in the Ukraine, then I think it underlines again how important it is to really have a wholesale transformation of our economy, because of the way that it's driving out the best and the brightest, from all classes out of the Philippines. And that is really what is at stake in this election. And the reason that Leody and I, despite the fact that we're behind in the polls, are running in these elections until the end is because we stand for this wholesale transformation of our economy, which is very much needed at this point. Unfortunately, so much of the propaganda that has come from business and the government is that the destruction of our manufacturing and agriculture were necessary in order to bring in foreign investment. That is the sort of framework that we need to shake. And this is the reason that we're really running in these elections at this point. It's not a popular view, but it's the only view that is really the only one to take if we are to really understand why we have had such a tragic run in our economy over the last 30 to 40 years. And even many of our media people who are here today, many of their friends have gone off to other countries, especially in the West, in the North, because, being people of talent, but at the same time, people who want to rise up in their professions, there's a glass ceiling in the Philippines that they cannot breach. And so we have so many of our talented media people also migrating to the West because of the constrictions of our economy. Just to go to the situation in the Ukraine then, definitely I agree with Joe that this Russian invasion must be condemned, that invasion is no solution, that it is creating a humanitarian nightmare. And of course, it is a very grave violation of Ukrainian sovereignty. So that should be clear. Secondly, that I fully agree with the General Assembly resolution asking for an end to the fighting and a negotiated peace. I think that's the only position to take. However, I think that most of the countries in the global south, although they voted, for the resolution, though with quite a number of abstentions, okay, from the global south, they are not willing to be drawn in beyond that to the conflict by siding with the United States and the West and NATO. I think that's very clear that it's not just China, it's not just India, it's really most of the countries in the global south. Yes, let's condemn, but let's not be drawn into this conflict because there is a US agenda here and we don't want to be part of that. I think that the aspect of the Ukrainian situation, but that must really be brought up, is that to a great extent it was provoked by the United States and NATO. So Russia invaded, but it was in great part due to a really grave provocation by the US and the North Atlantic Treaty Organization. Joe already mentioned this, that when the Soviet Union collapsed in 1991, and Ukraine was part of the old Soviet Union, and Joe already mentioned the very close cultural ties between Ukraine and Russia. The US and NATO under Clinton during that period took advantage of it to try to push the NATO right to the borders of the Soviet Union, the old Soviet Union, to Russia. And this was a time when Russia was very weak. You had the IMF coming in and imposing, a shock therapy in the economy. The government was also very weak. This was headed then by the drunkard Boris Yeltsin, and but even then you did have voices in Russia that were basically saying that we cannot just have NATO and the US take advantage of this and ring us militarily. Now, of course, when Putin took over, and Putin's very controversial, and we have many problems with Putin. At the same time, he did respond to, some of the big fears of Russians at that point in time, and fears about their national security. As well as the fall in their lives in terms of economic losses, and the way that Russia was disrespected in global affairs at the time that the US was saying that now we just have a unipolar world. It is us, and so we must then see the way that. Despite many problems with him when it comes to democratic rights, in the last couple of years, the sense of Russia being, again, a great power under Putin has become quite widespread. And the sense of fear of Russia being encircled by NATO has become a big driving force in Russian politics over the last 2 decades now. And I think that probably one way of understanding Russia's fears is during the Cuban Missile Crisis in 1961. If people remember, Khrushchev wanted to station medium-range nuclear missiles in Cuba. And in response to that, Kennedy threatened to blow up the whole world. And he said that this is just 90 miles from the US. And that will mean just a very few seconds in terms of posing an existential threat to the destruction of the United States. And Kennedy went on to impose sea quarantine of vessels entering, Cuban space, territorial water space, before they entered that. And I think this is the same thing to understand what has happened in Ukraine. NATO's and the US's objective has always been to bring Ukraine into NATO. And not only that, it has interfered in Ukrainian politics. It has, the Central Intelligence Agency has worked with fascists and neo-fascists to be able to install a pro-Western government in the Ukraine. And so when one looks at the threat to Russia, that it is a threat whereby US nuclear weapons would be stationed right at the borders of a NATO country, Ukraine, posing a super existential threat, then one can understand why Putin has acted this way, in some sense, many ways recklessly, unjustifiably, but at least we can understand what went into it. I think what the Russia would be interested in would be an arrangement that would respond to its national security fears, which is a zone of neutral countries, including the Ukraine, that would not be staging areas for NATO and its aggressive strategy. And I think this neutral zone, would respond to Russian security concerns, but it would also respond to Ukrainian concerns about independence. So my sense is that this diplomatic option was something that was on the table for quite a number of years, but the US and NATO always tossed it aside, that it was not worth considering. Basically, what they wanted was that Ukraine should enter NATO. And I think the escalation of events there, because this is a series of events that obviously hurts Russia too, and not just Ukraine. We have to understand why this seemingly reckless act has happened, and indeed, this is the act of a leadership that has been forced to the wall. Okay, so basically, Putin knew that there would be all sorts of ramifications, including economic ramifications, everything else coming down, and yet they were forced to act. And while that action we condemn, we should also understand that it was provoked by US and NATO moves. And this is why I think the global South countries have condemned the invasion, but they don't want to go any further. And certainly they don't want to be played by the United States at this point in time. And I think that is just right, because their national interests are not involved. Even more, they wouldn't want to be used in a US game to regain superpower status. And here I would just like to bring in recent events. As we know, the United States was forced out of Afghanistan in a very humiliating way. Its credibility suffered all over, even among its Western allies. And the US credibility with the governments of the North in Europe had really plunged to a new low, because it wasn't just the United States, but NATO that was involved in Afghanistan, and thereby also suffered credibility when that fell, when the US exited. So there is an element here by which the US is now trying to really drum up a lot of support for an aggressive isolation of Putin, mainly in order to be able to regain its superpower status and rein in its NATO allies, saying, okay, we're back, we're back after the disaster of Afghanistan. We're back after Trump created a lot of problems with you guys, and we're back to assert, that we're the leaders of the free world. And so that's I think the U.S. agenda here. We cannot divorce what's happening in terms of U.S. policy in the Ukraine with the exit from Afghanistan. Now there are people that have said that, oh, doesn't this have implications for the Pacific, for East Asia? Is this not going to be a situation that will provoke China to take over Taiwan? And I think that these are, in my view, fears that are not grounded in any reality. Let's look at what's really the case. Ukraine is not bound by the U.S. to a treaty in which the U.S. would need to come to its support. Taiwan is bound with the U.S. by a treaty in which the U.S. would come to its support in the event of conflict with China. And of course, this is a contradiction with the US's one China policy. The second thing I think we should realize is that the South China Sea is not a Chinese sea, despite the problems we have with China taking over, some of our maritime possessions. The South China Sea is an American lake. I mean, Joe and others know this. Underneath, it controls subsurface waters with its nuclear and ICBM submarines. On the surface, the Seventh Fleet, with its hundreds, of vessels, controls the surface. And on the air, naval ships, surveillance, just you name it. This is one of the most militarized areas on Earth, and it is the U.S. that rules the waves in this area. And one can make the case that many of China's provocative moves, which has been, from the Philippine point of view, which must be condemned, are really strategic defensive moves on the part of China to push out its defense perimeter. Again, we condemn those, but we need to understand why they're taking place. That the U.S. is present in the Taiwan Straits. In fact, in 1995, when there was a heightening of conflict between China and Taiwan, the United States, under Clinton, sent in 2 aircraft carriers to the Taiwan Straits. And it has always held the option of doing that again if there is a heightening of tension between Taiwan and the United States. So, in other words, China would be crazy to do anything rash like an invasion of Taiwan because this would really be a suicidal move. And you have to realize that the U.S. Forces in bases around China, from the north as well as the South China Sea. Southeastern China is the industrial center of China. And, this would be seconds from being wiped away by a U.S. conventional or nuclear attack. I mean, these are just the realities of this situation, which is why China would be out of its mind, to carry out any sort of invasion of Taiwan at this point. The third thing that, by the way, the one thing which we must realize is that owing to the Ukrainian conflict, the far right in Japan, well, they're not really far right in the sense that they're already in government, but the former Prime Minister of Japan, Abe, has said, that the Ukraine crisis provides an opportunity for the U.S. to station nuclear weapons in Japan. And so basically, of course, many of us believe that the nuclear weapons have been there, and the Pentagon policy is neither to confirm nor deny that its ships have nuclear weapons. But at the level of formal policy, Japan has said, that we cannot have nuclear weapons in Japan. Suddenly, the most influential prime minister of Japan over the last several decades says, okay, now let's bring in tactical nuclear weapons from the United States to take advantage of this crisis. Now, that's, I think, not an accident that he said that. I think that Washington probably had a hand in this, especially given its effort at this point in time to have some sort of a comeback in the process. But the last thing is China is in this big diplomatic role. Its economic policies, it is now held in very high regard in so many parts of the global south. We may have problems again with some of its economic policies, like the Belt and Road Initiative, fine, but we also have to realize that it is a country on a roll diplomatically because of its economic strength at this point in time. And it would not want to endanger that status with anything rash that it does in the Taiwan Straits. So I would just like to end by saying that I'm not worried about China taking advantage. I'm more worried about the United States stoking tensions in this area. I know some people basically would say, oh, is that even a possibility? Of course it is a possibility. Okay. The most warlike country on earth over the last 246 years since its independence from the British has been the United States. It has been almost constantly at war. It has just finished a 20-year period in 2021 where it was in a war for 20 years, 20 long years. Before that, it was constantly on an expansionist course. And then there were the two world wars, and then there was the Cold War. And then the post-Cold War era in which there was this tremendous engagement of the US in the Middle East, the Bush attack on Iraq, etc., etc., etc. Okay. Now, this is a country that when it feels that its global standing has been damaged by Afghanistan, I think that it is not out of the realm of the imagination that it would try to stoke fears in a place where it feels superior in the world, in response to the Ukraine crisis, in order to regain its global standing. And so what I think we must really look out for are signs in the Asia Pacific that the US is heightening its military posture and its engagement militarily in this area. So let me just say, that I would agree again with Joe that it is a complex situation. We need to look at the complexities of the situation. We must condemn the Russian invasion, but we also must understand that this was provoked to a great degree by the United States and NATO, and that the danger in the Asia Pacific is not Chinese taking over Taiwan, but the US heightening the tensions in this area. And I think we are, as a country, very much involved in this at this point, because we have a president, that despite his rhetorical statements, actually, ended up saying that, oh, I'm not just going to withdraw from the VFA. That's all over. We now are back into a normal relationship with the United States. We affirm the U.S. alliance, and this is a government that people had thought would begin a new leaf in U.S. in policy, but now has is in this process of both subjecting the country to a lot of the demands of China, but not only China but the United States. It is now a government that is a slave to two masters. It's a tragic situation. Now I say we're engaged in this because the terrible thing about what has happened during the Aquino administration, which was so pro-US, that it gave the United States 5 bases in the Philippines. These are nominally Philippine bases, and now they are bases in which the US is pre-positioning troops and others, weaponry under the Enhanced Defense Cooperation Agreement with the United States. And back in the 1990s, part of the disagreements with the Aquino government was the rental of Clark and Subic. Well, the Aquino administration, past administration, gave 5 new bases to the Philippines, not only in violation of our sovereignty, but even without a rental agreement. And I'm glad that Professor Simbulan is here, because Professor Simbulan and Cora Fabros were the people that were on the forefront of the struggle to kick out Subic and Clark, and they devoted a lot of their lives and intellectual and activist work to that. And I think they would be as shocked as Joe and me at the way that these 2 past administrations have just turned us over again to the United States. And if there's any conflict in this area, we become part of this conflict, because of the way that we have had 2 administrations either oscillating from the United States to China, or the United States, like with the Aquino administration, and now, being subject both to China and the United States, with a tremendous military presence on the part of the United States in our part of the world, in this country. So I am so glad that Roland and Cora are here. And I think they should say a few words about this situation, because they have contributed so much to freeing this country from the US bases, only to see them return in a new form. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much to Dr. Walden Bello for very interesting eye-opener analysis, giving us practically a crash course on the realities of geopolitics, reacting to the ideas of Dr. Gerson, and also reminding us of recent history. And very interesting, our 2 speakers, our speaker and reactor, giving us a very truthful and balanced overview, which we don't normally see in our international media. Even in our Philippine media, we only see one picture, one side. And now we have a very enlightened perspective. And thank you also, Dr. Bello, for mentioning Ms. Cora Valdez-Fabros, and also Ms. Tina Ebro. They're the ones who helped Pandesal Forum to organize and to invite both of you here. And thank you to Dr. Roland Simbulan. Maybe with Dr. Bello has a suggestion. Can we invite Dr. Simbulan to say a few words to react to the 2 previous speakers, the speaker and the reactor, Dr. Simbulan? Because Dr. Bello mentioned the 5 US military bases right now in the Philippines under EDCA and BFA? And would this be like a danger just in case the US gets involved in a war in North Korea, Taiwan, or something? Is Dr. Simbulan okay to say a few words?
Yes, I'm sorry, I have to keep my video off because of the internet connections a bit weak, no?
Yes,
Anyway,
Dr. Roland Simbulan, welcome.
Yeah. Well, first of all, I'd like to send my greetings to my old friends, Joseph and Walden, for their contributions to this discussion about the war in Ukraine, Russia's invasion, and its implications not just to our region, but to the global geopolitical situation. No? Well, in many ways, this war that was, of course, provoked by U.S. NATO forces, which led to the Russian invasion of Ukraine, has in many ways also, I believe, altered the U.S. strategy, no? Because global strategy, because while it has been trying to shift towards focusing on China as the main enemy, and while at the same time perhaps on a tactical, tactically trying to neutralize or the China-Russian alliance, no, both political, economic, and military. But now, because of this war, that strategy of focusing on China actually has greatly been altered, no? And I think that because of the isolation, economic, political isolation that US, EU, and its allies are doing against Russia, it will only further cement the strategic alliance between China and Russia, no? Which will be in many ways a formidable political and military alliance, no? Given China's economic clout internationally. The cementing of these ties, I think, will be forced upon Russia and welcomed by China, because now it will rely more on China for the things that it cannot anymore get from Europe or from the United States and its allies, no? And this has, of course, implications, especially here in the Philippines, because the hawks here, especially, who have been trying to invite and even welcome U.S. Military involvement, at most the restoration of U.S. Bases in the Philippines, they now would think that all the more we should cement these ties with the U.S. and, of course, the AFP with the Pentagon, because of this threat, no? That China may have against the country. The threat emanating from the sea, but well, some of the conservatives here are even expanding this to say that this threat is also on the entire country, the entire country. So I've been reading some of their reactions, and some of them are already insinuating that economically they are creeping into the Philippines, and then the next stage is to follow it up with a more military threat, because they say that, well, our telecom, they're coming into our telecom, they're now through their partners here, they've controlled the Malampaya natural gas fields, and etc. So I think the propaganda against not just Russia, but also against China, has intensified, and we can expect that in the coming months and years, they will try to cement stronger ties with the United States. Well, of course, we are now facing a change of leadership, in the Philippines. I hope it will really be change, some kind of change that will not continue the status quo, or even make it worse. Make it worse. So thank you for this opportunity. I'm sorry I could not. I had to close my video because of the irregular internet connection in my area. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Roland Simbulan, for your reactions to Dr. Joseph Gerson and Dr. Walden Bello. We have a question here from Ms. Tina Ebro. She's one of the persons who helped connect Pandesal Forum with Dr. Joseph Gerson and suggested we invite Dr. Walden Bello. A question from Ms. Tina Ebro for our two speakers. Thank you, Dr. Roland Simbulan, book author and nationalist intellectual. Ms. Tina Ebro, can we unmute her?
Oh, very, very quickly. I know we don't have the time.
Yes, thank you, ma'am,
I
for your
just
question.
need your feedback, Joseph and Walden. You know, I watched John Mearsheimer yesterday. He's the distinguished professor of political science of the University of Chicago. And he, like you, thinks that the West pushed Putin and Russia to the wall. And I am very worried about his forecast. In a year or so, he said, the West will also push China to the edge on the issues of Taiwan and the South China Sea. I would like to get your feedback.
Thank you, Ms. Tina Ebro. Yes.
So I think it's difficult to know what's going to happen in a year because the situation is as fluid as it is. What we know is that the Biden administration is in the process of trying to revise the U.S. national military strategy. It had not anticipated to put as much focus on Russia and Europe as it needs to. A year might be a bit soon, but clearly the situation in Taiwan is very dangerous and dynamic, and the need to be working for peace is critically important. There's one point I want to make here, which is to say that I think Russia was pushed near to the wall, but not quite to the wall, and that there were options and blunders on both sides. So in the track 2 discussions I was involved in, which I can't name the people who were in it, but it included some very senior former government officials and advisors in both in Russia, the United States, and Europe. And in those discussions, basically a consensus for a diplomatic path out was developed. And we've seen some aspects of it in what the Russians have since put forward. So that was a moratorium on any new NATO memberships for at least 15 years, with a commitment that it could be extended, that they would build on the Minsk II agreements to create a neutral and federated Ukrainian state, which would have allowed for the Russian speakers and Russian Orthodox and Russian economically oriented people in the Donbass area to have greater autonomy, for resumption, basically renewal of the INF treaty, outlawing intermediate nuclear forces from the Atlantic to the Urals, and others. And on the one hand, this was a missed opportunity by Biden because he could have said all these things, and it might have avoided war, though we can't know if it would. Or the other reality, I think, is that with Russia having encircled Ukraine on three sides, and with its overwhelming military power, it had enormous political and diplomatic leverage. And so you had Michael McFaul, the former U.S. ambassador to Moscow, who absolutely hates Putin, who in Foreign Affairs was writing that it was time to negotiate a new grand bargain with Russia. Russia might have given a week or two to see if some of that might have been able to come to fruition. So it's interesting. I mean, I've been involved in exchanges, among others, with Alexei Gromyko at the Russian Academy of Sciences, where his position has been, as was said earlier, that Russia's back was up against the wall. They expected heavy consequences, but they had to do it for Russia's national security. Clearly the drive, over the last 30 years, the expansion of NATO, beginning with Clinton in 1994, has created the foundations of this crisis. The other piece to say is that over time, Russia may prevail in this war. I mean, they have military forces that are superior to Ukraine's, but I think they've been surprised at how difficult the fighting has been. And I think on the other side of this, Russia is going to emerge as a much weaker nation, even if it has that Ukrainian buffer. And what the Russian-Chinese relationship is going to be is I think one of the great uncertainties. On the one hand, there's considerable speculation of a deepening Russian-Chinese alliance. Basically a balancing alliance against the United States. But on the other, how far it will go is not entirely clear. I mean, there are certain benefits and mutualities, but Russia is not going to be a market that can offset Europe, Ukraine, and some of the other international market that'll be lost potentially lost in this war. And as bad as Putin is, I don't think he wants Russia to become a protectorate of China. And with the absolutely imbalanced power between the two, Russia faces that possibility. So I'll shut up with that, but I wanted to make that point.
Thank you very much, Dr. Joseph Gerson. Dr. Bello, Dr. Walden Bello, do you have a reaction to the question of Ms. Tina Ebro?
Yes.
Yes.
Well, I think that, first of all, the Ukraine crisis was a lifesaver for Biden. I think he's been under severe attack from the far right in the United States. But increasingly, he was becoming unpopular because of inflation and inability to really create an economic path for the US. And there was increasing disaffection in terms of the Democrats on the left. So I think that this eruption of the situation in the Ukraine just came just at the right time. Came right before his State of the Nation Union address, in which the focus became Ukraine. It became sort of an effort to drum up support for his administration. And again, it's a sort of interesting wag the dog tale, in which, yes, it's not the US that carries out the aggression, but it's another power that carries out the aggression, but then US domestic politics is reconfigured, because the reigning party takes advantage of what is happening. So that's, I think, one of the things that we really need to look at. Why has the US so aggressively taken advantage of the crisis and is not open to a diplomatic solution that would be reasonable to Russia at this point in time? So that's one element. The other element is, as I wrote in a long article on the US-China relationship in the Socialist Register, China is definitely become the global center of capital accumulation. Its contribution to world GDP growth is around 28%. And that of the US is half of that. The US is a deindustrialized economy and financialized economy, whereas the Chinese economy, continues to be an industrial giant, partly because of the way that US transnationals relocated so many of their industrial processes in China. And as we all know, industry is the source of value, it's the source of economic strength. Whereas the US now is a very financialized, Wall Street dominated economy. And so you have a situation where the United States is on a downspin economically, and China is definitely on the upswing in terms of its global relations, economic relations with the United States. And I think this creates a very dangerous situation, because the only area where the US still enjoys undisputed superiority is in the military. Mm-hmm. And the US, basically the US in all areas dominates tremendously. And the US spends $750 billion a year, and it spends twice what China spends at this point in time. And so and China, in his 2017 speech on the Chinese Dream, Xi Jinping said that China would not be able to match the United States, or what he calls, a world-class power, till around 2049, till around 2050. And I think those are the realities, that whether it's conventional, nuclear, space, naval, the US is so far ahead. Now, it creates a very dangerous situation, because for superpowers hegemonic powers in decline economically, like the United States, it becomes very tempting to try to right the balance through military means, because that's the only place where you're enjoying superiority. So I think the danger now is that the US looks at the gap, that it's 20 years before China can really catch up militarily, as they now have admitted, and 30 years. So within that 30-year period, there's that window of opportunity to do something about it. And I think there's the danger. You have an economic power in decline, but who maintains tremendous military superiority over its rival, and having a tradition of 246 years of almost constant warfare, and just coming out of a big defeat in Afghanistan. All of these factors, I think, begin to crowd in, because the you know, the German theorist Clausewitz said that, you know, war is calculation. War is a matter of calculation. But I think it was incomplete, because war is also passion. And there is no power more passionate than superpower in decline. Now, the danger is when you have calculation of a 30-year window of opportunity with a passion to remain, the, you know, fear and resentment at losing its superpower status. When you join this passion to reason, I think that creates a very dangerous situation for us in the world. So I would, again, the greatest danger to world peace is not Russia, it's not China, it's a superpower in decline, and that's the United States. And I think what many of us had seen, or even, you know, in 2020, you know, that the Biden administration confronted with a decline would move away from the policies of Trump, which were unilateralist, but then try to make a big effort to gain leadership through recreating the Western alliance, including NATO, and you know, buffeted by domestic crisis, and feeling very, very upset by China having gained economic primacy. That's a very dangerous formula. So, you know, for me, I don't think we can let what's happening in the Ukraine take away from these strategic concerns about the loss of US power being addressed militarily by Washington. So that's what I think is the main threat to the world today. It's the United States, not Russia, not China.
If I could just jump in, Walden,
Thank you.
and say, you know, just to say, I fully agree with you. And you know, what we see in U.S. policy documents, including our national strategic guidance, it's that, you know, China is the #1 enemy for which the United States is preparing for war, and that will remain so even after the Ukraine war. And also to say, as you likely know, certainly in Republican Party circles in Washington, there's an expectation that a belief that war with China is inevitable, And so the belief that while the United States is stronger, it should attack. But that it would happen in a year, I don't know. I want to say that, but there is, as you say, this window of opportunity, and my belief also is that kind of united actions can change policies, can limit what aggressors do, and so the need for collaboration of peace forces around the world is just really essential. And the other piece, as I was saying in the closing of my remarks, is while all of this is going on, we face the very real and existential threat of climate change, not to mention the possibility of miscalculation or accidents leading to nuclear war. One more very important reason for us to be trying to build collaborations rather than confrontations.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you very much for the two very brilliant intellectuals. Alam niyo, the analysis that you just gave now is really amazingly thought-provoking and very brilliant. Thank you very much. There's a question here from Mike Nabalio of ABS-CBN TV, ABS-CBN News. Mike Nabalio, he has a question for both of you. Ukrainian President Zelensky says now that Ukraine will no longer insist on joining NATO. What impact do you think this will have on the Russian invasion of Ukraine? His next question, Mike Nabalio of ABS-CBN News, how likely is it that President Putin will consider stopping the invasion after the number of deaths and damage caused on Ukrainian cities? Two questions from Mike Nabalio of ABS-CBN News for both of you.
So what I'm reading is that that's not going to be enough for Putin. The Russians came forward with sort of, they said in a moment they would agree to a ceasefire if four conditions were met. NATO is one of them, but also a demand for neutral state, and I think most importantly, their insistence on basically Donbass independence or annexation, and Ukraine is not at this juncture ready to accept that. So it's going to take more than that. I'm trying to remember what was the second question?
The second question is, would President Putin end the war now with this?
I think I don't think so. Putin has staked a lot on winning this war, and he has a history both in relationship to Chechnya, especially Chechnya, the destruction of Grozny, and also in Syria, where they bombed certain areas just total smithereens. So I think at this juncture, Russia's going to continue hard. I mean, one of the questions will be how many Russian casualties he can take. I mean, the reports of they're contested. The number of Russian soldiers who have been killed so far. Putin's concerned to keep this knowledge from the Russian people. And one of the possible outcomes of this thing may be an extended war with with the U.S. and NATO, basically pushing an insurgent war in Ukraine against the Russians, with the idea of bleeding Russia in much the same way that Russia and then the U.S. were bled in Afghanistan. So this could be in some ways a long war. We just don't know yet.
Thank you very much. We have a very short last question because Dr. Bello has to leave for another engagement. Ateneo de Manila University Professor Dr. Joby Meroy has this short question. How come no one in our media reported the meeting between China President Xi Jinping and France President Macron and Scholz yesterday, what is the Philippine relationship with Russia? Maybe short answers, then we'll go to the closing statements because Dr. Bello has to leave in a few minutes. That's a question from Dr. Joby Miroy for our two speakers.
Well, I think that one of the big losers in this whole thing has been Europe, because basically the U.S. via NATO and by its really very big push to get the European countries to take an aggressive stance against Putin. I think they realize that whatever moves towards independence of the U.S. alliance they may have had to move in a more independent path, I think that has been lost at this point in time. And so my sense is that the French and the Germans, because the British are hopelessly within the American side, I think that in terms of their leaderships, they're probably, worried about the way they've been sort of sandwiched between Russia and the United States, thereby losing European leverage. And I'm not surprised that they would try to reach out to Xi Jinping because, China has been a very strong economic ally of both Germany and France. And I think this might be an effort to try to really reduce their political dependence on the United States. So I'm not exactly sure what this will all result in. But certainly the Chinese and the Europeans are, I think, trying to find something independent of what the U.S. and what Russia would be doing to try to sort of carve out some sort of a third path out of this conflict. So that's my sense of what. And the Philippines' relationship with Russia, I think it has been fairly normal over the last few years. I know that Russia is now a destination for OFWs, increasingly so. And my sense also is, that over the last few years, the Duterte administration and the Putin government have tried to move towards closer ties politically, although this hasn't resulted in any sort of major military exchange, mainly because the United States, has basically forbidden that. And of course, there's the personal element there where Duterte has, said that Putin is one of the people he admires. So there's that sort of, but Russia has not really been a major player for the Philippines. It's mainly the United States, China, ASEAN, even Australia is probably, definitely Japan and Australia. So Russia is very far, from being a major player in terms of Philippine diplomacy. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Dr. Gerson, would you like to, or
Just briefly to say, in the run up to the war, those of us in the U.S. peace movement had great appreciation for President Macron's efforts to try to mediate and prevent war, and clearly Germany, given especially its economic ties with Russia, was seeking to avoid a war. So in a sense, there's a community of interest, as Walden was saying, and one can hope that they might come up with the diplomatic resolution, some of the leverage needed to bring the war to an end. That would be ideal. So we can hope.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. Our time has run out. This is a very interesting discussion because Dr. Bello has another engagement. Can we request the two esteemed speakers to give us their closing statement to summarize their analysis and viewpoints? Thank you very much. We'd like to start first with the very respected global peace advocate and intellectual, Dr. Joseph Gerson. Thank you for educating us, enlightening us.
So I won't try to summarize it all, but simply to remind us that the the underlying force that has led to this war has been NATO's expansion and bringing its forces to Russia's borders, including the so-called missile defenses in Romania and Poland, which could be converted into nuclear armed cruise missiles. So Russia's certainly had very deep security concerns, which I think ultimately precipitated this, as did the, if you will, the ethno-nationalism of Putin and the Russians and their desire to be again seen as a great power in the world. I guess what I want to close on is one, just an appreciation of the opportunity to engage with you, to hear Walden again, to hear the questions, which gives me at least a little glimpse of concerns and thinking in the Philippines, which I think is just really critical for those of us in the United States. To say, to ask you to hold us in your thoughts and as you think in terms of solidarity actions, because here we are in the belly of the beast. The militarization that has been, Walden talked about the 246 years of warfare. The military spirit in this country rises and falls, and at this point, we're in the midst of a war fever, and it's going to have deep ramifications not only for other countries but here in the United States. And I guess the last thing to say, just I guess to express my hope that the emerging leadership in the Philippines and the Philippines people will hone to pursuing your national interests, not those of imperial states, and to do all you can to free yourself from the militarism and manipulations of principally the United States, but other forces. One last thing to say, Walden was talking about former Prime Minister Abe and his call for serious consideration of welcoming U.S. nuclear weapons to Japan. There's been, if you go way back, what you find is that before Japan launched its 15-year war, there was a debate among its elite as to whether or not they should go for what they call the whole melon, basically to replace the United States and Britain as the regional empire, or whether they should, whether given their economic limitations among others, should seek to be sort of a secondary power, growing their empire under the umbrella of the U.S. empire. And with the with Japan's defeat, the U.S. brought the leadership of that second group into power. But these are elite figures who have wanted to have, if you will, imperial power in Asia Pacific. Quite some time ago now, over 25 years ago, and I interviewed the principal author of Japan's defense white paper, its military policy. And in that session, it was 1996, I believe, he said that for 30 years it had been the Japanese military's interpretation of its constitution that the Japanese military has the right to possess nuclear weapons. So I think we should understand that while all this is happening, the United States is also nurturing this sub-imperial power to augment its power, and it's a dangerous force that people need to be aware of.
Thank you very much for your closing statement, Dr. Joseph Gerson, and especially thank you for your lifelong commitment to peace. Next, last but not the least, we'd like to invite Dr. Walden Bello for his closing statement. I just like to say, I admire Dr. Walden Bello, but after this session, I have become more convinced that he is the most intellectually brilliant and unquestionably the most nationalist vice presidential candidate in this election in the Philippines today. I thought I already knew a lot and read a lot, but after listening to both of you, especially Dr. Walden Bello, it was like amazing talaga. I'm now more convinced you are the most intellectually brilliant vice presidential candidate today in the Philippines. Your closing statement, Dr. Walden Bello.
Maraming salamat, Wilson.
Yes.
Well, it was a great relief to be engaged in a great foreign policy discussion for a change. Yes, because in less than 24 hours, I came from a press conference in answer to being charged with cyber libel by
yesterday, cyber libel.
Sara Duterte's forces.
Maybe you can make a comment to our media friends.
No, that's okay. That's a different thing to this wonderful discussion that we've had with my friend Joe Gerson and others in the room here around the events in Ukraine. So I think I have said practically all I wanted to say. I just wanted to maybe just look into the future. Certainly, if Leody de Guzman and I win the elections, and miracles happen. Don't discount miracles. Because they can happen. We would have a very independent foreign policy, in one that would completely replace the kind of very pro-US policy and occasional very opportunistic policy, with respect to China that our previous governments have offered. But if we don't win, I don't see any change. Whether it's a Marcos administration or Lacson administration or Pacquiao administration or an ISCO administration or a Robredo administration, I think they will basically follow the same line of basically alignment with the United States, maybe occasionally flirting with China, but certainly reaffirming the U.S. Philippine military alliance. During the debate on the vice presidential debate 2 weeks ago, you saw this when Senator Soto, who is the head of the Senate, who's running for vice president, he said that, well, what we need, essentially what he said is the important thing in terms of our territorial defense, especially in the West Philippine Sea, is by handing over our response to the Chinese incursions to the United States by invoking the Mutual Defense Treaty. Because he said, well, once the Mutual Defense Treaty goes into actions, hindi na tayo yon, yung kanon na yon. Yun sabi niya. So basically, and then on the other hand, Senator Pangilinan, who is running with Leni Robredo, gave us an indication of where the Philippine administration under Robredo would be. And I think he mentioned that we need to fortify our defenses with Japan, the United States, Australia. He didn't mention India, but he was saying the Quad. Yeah, basically this was the Quad, that this would be an alliance that should be nurtured vis-a-vis China. Of course, he denied that it was allying with the Quad, but that was basically what he was saying. So I do not expect that Marcos or Pacquiao or Isko Moreno would depart from that. I think that's our dilemma at this point in time, because neither do they have domestic policies to change with the past. They do not also have a foreign policy to break with the past. And but I guess I'm confident that at some future time, I think sooner rather than later, people will realize that there has to be a break both domestically and foreign policy wise, and we don't just keep electing people in the same old mold of the elite. No? So let me just end with that and rush to my next engagement. Thank you.
Thank you very much again to Dr. Walden Bello and also to Dr. Joseph Gerson, two peace advocates, intellectual giants, today giving us amazing, brilliant, enlightening discussion. Intellectual, high-level Pandesal Forum here at 83-year-old Kamuning Bakery Cafe. Special thanks to Ms. Corazon Valdez Pabros, Ms. Tina Ebro for helping connect us to this global peace advocate, Dr. Joseph Gerson. And thank you very much to the two leaders. For Dr. Gerson, the reason Pandesal is the famous Filipino bread that everybody likes in the Philippines. So it's a forum where we eat pandesal and coffee. Your ideas today, both of you, are not only food for thought, but food for the soul and food for our passion, hopefully, and our idealism for peace in the world. Thank you very much, Dr. Joseph Gerson. Thank you very much to Dr. Walden Bello. And to our media friends, tomorrow, 10 o'clock, please come physically to Kamuning Bakery. Cal Yodi de Guzman, the running mate of Dr. Bello, will be here with Senator Nikki Coseteng, Senator Risa Ontiveros. Thank you very much, Dr. Joseph Gerson. I read a lot of your articles. You are very brilliant. You are very inspiring, what you've done. We hope to have another session with you, sir. Thank you very much. And thank you to our media friends. You have to unmute yourself, Dr. Gerson.
Just to say thank you. Thank you.
Your sound?
So,
yes.
So thank you. Just
your sound. Yes.
Yeah. So just to say thank you, and I look forward to working with you again in the future.
Yes, sir.
And I wish everybody on this call good health, especially as we continue to have the pandemic. Be well.
Thank you very much, Dr. Gerson. Thank you very much for all your efforts. And thank you to our media friends for attending today. We will send you a recording of this. Please give us your email address. And thank you very much. Tomorrow, to our media friends, tomorrow, 10 a.m., Calio de Guzman, Senator Risa Ontiveros, Senator Nikki Coseteng, and also Congresswoman Arlene Brosas tomorrow, 10 a.m., Kamuning Bakery, Pandesal Forum. Thank you very much to everyone. Thank you. We'll send you a recording of this. Thank you very much.
Okay, so yun mga kaibigan, muli nagbabalik tayo sa ating programang Tropa, no? Dito pa rin siyempre sa Millennial Online TV. At sa oras na alas 6:20 po ng gabi Philippine Standard Time. At yun, napakinggan natin, no, mga kaibigan, na yung Ukraine crisis, no, talaga naman. Actually nga, ang balita ko, ito rin daw hong bansang Hong Kong ay gustong sakupin ng bansang China. Aba, kasi nakita nila naman talaga na ang ekonomiya na maganda ngayon ng ang bansang Hong Kong. Yun, at syempre, hindi naman pumayag ang Hong Kong, baka mami, alam nyo naman, by hook or by crook, baka kunin ng China ang Hong Kong. Syempre, alam mo naman ng Hong Kong, kumpara natin sa China, the sleeping dragon, kapag kaya na nagising, aba, sigurado, di ba? Makukuha at makukuha itong maliit na Hong Kong na ito. So, ganun din yan. Katulad nitong Ukraine at saka nitong Russia, kita nyo naman, alam naman natin na Russia, since noon pa, talaga namang napaka-higante, ika nga, no, pagdating sa larangan ng mga fire and explosives, ng mga weapons na talaga namang ang Russia talaga namang sikat at kilala. Lalo na pagka nagpapakawala ng mga missile. Di ba? Tama ba yun? At yun, sabi sa atin ni ating katropang si Miss Jackie Nagpao Adahar, ang US yan, gusto niyan gera. Totoo yun. Totoo yun. Wala tayong magagawa. Siyempre, ang US napakalakas na bansa rin yan. Ano? At magandang hapon din kay Sir Roselito Reyes. Good afternoon, tropa. Sir Rosel watching in Marikina City. Pa-shoutout daw po doon kay Captain Storm, no? Captain Loveheart, Loads, Jason Chris, ng Star Maker Federana Family. Ayan po, magandang hapon daw, magandang gabi na, no? Diyan kina Captain Storm, Co-Captain Loveheart, Loads, Jason Chris, ng Star Maker Federana Family. Yan po, ang pagpapa-shoutout po, buhat po kay Sir Roselito Reyes. At hindi, maraming bago tayo magtuluyang magtapos mga kaibigan, no? Kita nyo, sana maayos na itong nangyayari po sa Ukraine at sa Russia. At sana wag nang madagdagan pa ng ibang bansa, no? Tulad ng China. Wag nyo na lang sakupin ng Hong Kong. At least makita nyo naman, gumaganda naman ang ekonomiya doon. At nakita nyo umaaseso yung Hong Kong. Pero sana wag nyo nang by hook or by crook ay kunin nyo pa. Kasi ayaw na pumayag ng Hong Kong na bakit kukunin nga naman ng China. Well, ganun talaga. Nasa propesya yan. Sinasabi na nga noon pa, bansa laban sa bansa, kaharian laban sa kaharian. Maglalaban-laban po. Yan po yung nakatadhana na. Pero siyempre, hanggat maaari, ayaw natin. Di ba? Dahil tayo pare-parehong tao, pare-pareho tayong anak ng Diyos. Kaya dapat sana inigiit ng HWPL na world peace na dapat yun po ang maganap. Okay, sa mga kaibigan, bukas itutungay natin sa inyo yung ginawa naman din na forum din ng Pandesal Forum dyan po sa QC, yung tungkol po sa Women's Month, no? At tingnan natin kung ano mga sinasabi nila former Senator Nicky Coseteng at ng Gabriela Party List, no, about sa mga kababaihan na ika nga wala. Dapat ika nga raw sa mga gabinete, etc., dapat meron din babaeng nakaupo. Wala din. Kasi kita niyo naman, nagkaroon na tayo ng presidenteng babae. Ilan na, di ba? Alam ko, 2 presidente na ng Pilipinas. Pero wala naman nangyari, di ba? Tulad doon lang ni Cory Aquino. Pag ako naging presidente, ang galunggong 10 piso na lang. Magkano galunggong ang kilo? Di ba? So, yun ang sinasabi natin. Hindi natin sinasabing panahon ni Marcos ay mura bilihin, kontrolado ang presyo ng produktong petrolyo at iba pang mga bilihin mura. Hindi natin sinasabing yun actually totoo naman yun nangyari, pero Hindi natin sinasabing dapat ang mamuno is Marcos. Siyempre kung sino gusto ng taong bayan, yun ang dapat mamuno sa ating bansa. Inaakala nating yun ang magaling, abay bakit hindi, di ba? Okay, so mga kaibigan, pansamantala magpapaalam muna kami ni Joshua Sumulat Baltao. At muli po kami magbabalik sa araw ng bukas para sa ating Friday edition ng programang Tropa. Pero bago tayo magtapos, sabay maraming salamat sa ating mga Tropa Pips, no? Kina Maring Chris Torres, Ferrejano, kay Miss Jackie Nagpauadahan ng LMT, kay Brother Manny Perez ng Painter's Choice na Paint Center sa Caloocan City. At din kay Sir Joey Reyes ng Marikina City. At din sa kanya pinasa-shoutout sina Captain Storm, Co-Captain Loveheart, Lodge Jason Chris ng Star Maker Federana Family. At ayun, ngayon lang nag-watching si Ma'am Bing Torres. Okay na, Ma'am Bing Torres, nag-chat na sa akin si Aguila. At sa Sunday nga raw ay makakapag-programa na siya. Ikakatuloy na raw ang public service ni Aguila Magas Gakusana. Okay, sa mga kaibigan, muli maraming salamat po sa inyong lahat, sa lahat ng tumunghay. No, sina Estel Pumaman, sina Chris Torres, sina Jun Del Rosario, yung ating ka-Agila, at lahat ng tumunghay. No? Sino pa ba? Kanina may nakita ko na walang bigla. Anyway, sa lahat po na hindi ko nabate, magandang gabi po sa inyo lahat. At muli tayo magbabalik bukas para sa isa pang episode at Friday edition ng programang Tropa. Muli ako nyo pong naging lingkod, naging kasama, kakwentuhan, kajamming, kabarangay, dito po sa programang Tropa. Rosel Lopez, magandang gabi Pilipinas, hasta la vista.
Ayos mo bang guminhawa ang iyong pakiramdam? Kung ikaw ay may sipon, ubo, lagnat at iba pang nararamdaman, lalo na ang sakit ng katawan, narito ng Yasmag Magnesium Therapy Oil. Ang Yasmag Magnesium Therapy Oil ay nakatutulong na ibsan ang iyong nararamdaman sa pamamagitan ng pagpahid sa apektadong parte ng katawan, gaya ng noo, balikat, tuhod at kung anuman ang masakit na parte ng iyong katawan. Panoorin ang mga testimonials ng gumamit ng Yasmag.
Yan po, ginagamit niya. Siya po ay isa sa aking mga testimony.
Ako, si Destino Francisco, ay gumagamit ng Yasmag na siyang nakapagpalakad sa akin. Kaya kayo, mga kaibigan ko at kakilala, ay pinapayuhan kong gumamit ng product na ito.
Isa sa ating testimony, ikukwento po niya sa inyo yung kanyang result nung siya ay 1 linggo nang nilalagnat at giniginaw ng hihina.
Hi, ako po si Rina Liliantos, 29 years old, taga Sariaya, Quezon po. Nangyari po sa akin, itong mga nakaraang araw po ay hindi ko po maintindihan yung pakiramdam ko, gawa pong ang sakit po sobra ng likod ko, nilalagnat ako, tapos po ay hindi lang po 1 linggo ang nararamdaman ko. Simula po nung July 30 hanggang itong araw, hanggang nung mga nakaraang araw. Yun lang po, nawala lang po ng dahil sa magnesium.
Paano ginawa mo?
Ang ginawa lang po sa akin ay pinahinaplas po sa akin likod kung saang parte ng katawan ang masakit. Tapos po ay hinilot lang po ako. At hanggang po pagpawisan ako sa pagkahilot na may magnesium. Ayun lang po, sunod-sunod po ang paglagay kung saan banda ang may masakit. At yun nga po, ilang araw lang sa paggamit yun ng magnesium, ako mismo, sarili ko, ramdam ko ang pagbabago sa aking katawan. Dahil po simula nga po nung July 30 hanggang itong itong mga nakaraang araw lang, hindi ako halos makatayo dahil sa sobrang sakit ng aking likod.
Ako po si Leslie. First time ko po mag-try nitong Yasmag Magnesium Therapy. Ang una ko pong naramdaman ang bango niya lang hapin, nakaka-relax ng katawan. And then yung sakit na iniinda ko sa puso, yung sakit-sakit, wala naman ako sakit sa puso, pero yung mga kirot-kirot nawala niya, instant nawala, na tagal ko nang iniinda. And then hindi siya malagkit ipahid.
Mga milenyo, pagod ka na ba galing sa trabaho? At gutom na sa maghabong pagtatrabaho, pero wala kang pagkain sa bahay? Narito na ang sagot mga katropa, ang super manok lechon. Napapawi sa inyong gutom at siguradong mapapa-analyze ka dahil sa tender juicy na jam mo pa at siguradong malinis at bagong katay buhat sa farm. Kaya super masalasa at pangmasa pa. Ano pa hinihintay niyo mga katropa? Takbo na sa Super Manok Panteño Siniluan at bumili na. Baka maabusan ka, katropa.
Mga millennials, marunong na ba kayong magluto ng mga masasarap at swak sa budget na mga pagkain? Abay, huwag puro lang kayo aksi at ML at puro pagkakalikot lang ng cellphone. Dapat marunong ka rin sa gawaing bahay at tulungan ang inyong mga mamsi. Kaya tara na, samahan natin ang kusinera ng bagong milenyo, si Ate J. At tuturuan tayong magluto ng mga masasarap na ulam para sa ating mga hapagkainan at swak pa sa budget. Ika nga, a delicious food on a proper price. Tara na, mga katropa! I-type lang sa inyong mga cellphone, sa inyong mga Facebook at YouTube, ang Millennial Online TV.
Mga katropa, ako po si Randel Villados, ang online naranista ng bagong milenyo ng Millennial Online TV, na nag-aanyaya sa inyo na makikanta, makisaya, at tumutok sa lahat ng programa ng Millennial Online TV. I-type lamang sa inyong Facebook at YouTube ang Millennial Online TV. Nood na mga katropa!
Ako inyong lingkod, Rosel Lopez, ang inyong katropa, ang inyong kabarangay dito sa Millennial Online TV. Abangan ang ating mga kaganapan dito sa ating bansa at abangan din ang panunungkol ni Kapitan sa ating Dalaw Barangay. Paano nyo kami mapapanood? I-type lamang sa inyong mga cellphone, sa inyong Facebook at YouTube ang Millennial Online TV. Ano pa hinihintay nyo mga katropa? Like, subscribe, at share na. Okay mga katropa?
Mga katropa, ako po si Gazi Sarip, ang inyong tagapaghatid ng balita sa bagong milenyo, na nag-aanyaya sa inyo na tunghayan ng aking mga pag-uulat at tumutok sa lahat ng programa dito sa Millennial Online TV. I-type lamang sa inyong Facebook at YouTube ang Millennial Online TV. Nood na mga katropa! Mga katropa, ako po si Jim Pahayag, ang inyong tagapaghatid ng mga balita sa bagong milenyo, na nag-aanyaya sa inyo na tunghayan ng aking mga pag-uulat at tumutok sa lahat ng programa ng Millennial Online TV. I-type lang sa inyong mga Facebook at YouTube ang Millennial Online TV. Nood na mga katropa!
Ikaw ba'y nag-iisa? Nalulungkot dahil iniwan at ipinagpalit, niloko ng iyong minamahal. Kung ngayon, i-type sa inyong mga cellphone, Facebook o YouTube man ang Millennial Online TV. Dahil nasa Millennial Online TV na ang online haranista ng bagong milenyo, si Randel Villados.
Naninigas ang aking katawan kapag umikot ng plaka.
At haharanahin kayo ni Randel ng iba't ibang awitin para maibsan ang inyong inip at kalungkutan kahit nasaan man kayo.
Hanggang sa tumanda. Come on! Kung tayo'y matanda na, sana'y di tayo magbago.
At pwede rin kayong makiduet kay Randall tuwing Sabado ng hapon. Tutok na! Tawag na, mga milenyo!
Araw-araw ikaw ang gusto kong kasama. Buhay ko'y kumpleto na tuwing nandito ka sa tabi ko o aking giliw.
Barangay, pangunahing unit ng pamahalang lokal kung saan dito pinag-uusapan ang bawat sinalot ng mga residente ng bawat barangay. Dito rin pinag-uusapan ng mga piling hanggang na opisyal na barangay ang mga proyekto para sa kanilang barangay. Kumustahin natin ang panunungkulan ni Kapitan dito sa Dalo Barangay sa Millennial Online TV worldwide, ang katropa ng bawat barangay.
Ating tinatapos ang ating pagpupulong. Maraming salamat po sa inyong pagdalo at tapos na po ang ating session. Enjoy na po tayo.
Mga balita at pangyayaring naganap sa buong magdamag. Ihimayin, tatalakayin, ibabalita, ngayon na, dito lang sa Millennial Online TV News Recap.
Kasi hindi naman lahat. Halos lahat. Or the CIDG. Ito yan sila. So ito yung dalawang CIDG by the Philippines.
Nagbabasa ka pa ba ng dyaryo? O nakikinig ka pa ba ng radyo? Kung ngayon, lahat yan ay mapapakinggan nyo na sa inyong mga cellphone. Dahil online na tayo, mga kamilenyo. Kaya manood, makinig, dito sa Millennial Online TV.
Rider, sumalpok sa
Kaya
poste ng
i-follow, like, subscribe, at i-share na, mga katropa.
Now, we are
The biggest destruction of dangerous drugs worth 1.2
Rebisahin,
billion.
opinyon, malawaking, aksyonan. Kasama si Rosel Lopez, ang inyong katropa sa pagbabalita. Dito lang sa Millennial Online TV. Tutok na, mga katropa!
Inaigting, pinalakas, ang bagong News Online TV ng bagong milenyo. Millennial Online TV, ang katropa mo sa pagbabalita.
Mga kababayan, ang pambansang awit ng Pilipinas.
Kayang magiliw, ewas ang sinakalan, alam ng puso, sa titik mo'y buhay. Lupang binirang, tuyag ka ng magiting, sa mandulupin, di ka pasisingil, sa nagatak tutok sa simoy at sa langit mo pagaw, ay ginatang tulad, awit sa pagkayang minamahal, ang isang lang matawag mo'y tagumpay na nag-iindig, ang bituin at araw niya kailan ang may di magtitingin. Luman ang araw ng warhabit pagsinta, buhay langit sa piling mo. Ang ligaya na pagkay mga akin, ang mamatay ng dahil sa'yo.
Sa lahat ng bumubuo ng Millennial Online TV at sa lahat po ng sumusuporta, maraming salamat po. Millennial Online TV is now signing off.